Hello, my name is Chitra Golestani, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Wilmette Institute's webinar on family relationships with a stellar panel of young adults. As many of our viewers know, the Wilmette Institute is an online educational institution providing university and extension courses dedicated to building a new society through transformative education. Our interdisciplinary courses aim to develop the capacity of participants to contribute meaningfully to the current discourses of society, exploring both spiritual and material dimensions of our collective advancement. Our educational endeavors, including courses, certificate programs, webinars, aim to inspire a commitment of social transformation, drawing upon a Baha'i conceptual framework in the areas of community building, social action, and contributing to prevalent discourses. Next. Looking at March coming up, we have a few announcements. So looking ahead, we have 2 extension courses coming up, Cultivating Transformative Leadership and Baha'i Archives. Also in March, next please, is our webinar on March 30th, one day before Easter Sunday. So please mark your calendars with Counselor Nwandi Lawson, who will be speaking about becoming protagonists for social good in a presentation entitled "That Time Has Now Come." And in the info about it on our website, which I hope you'll go to and register, it states that she will be addressing the question, if a path to unity and justice is not yet visible in our community, does that mean this cannot exist? Or might there be steps we can take to bring this vibrant pattern of unity and diversity to life in any setting? Next. Now, we're ready to get started with today's webinar, noting that it is live streamed on YouTube and accessible later on SoundCloud, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We hope you enjoy the program and invite others to view it as well. During the presentation, you're invited to post your questions in the Q&A section, which will be addressed, of course, at the end when we get into the discussion portion. I have the pleasure to introduce the webinar today entitled Underlying Assumptions. Parents think they're always right. As a daughter and a parent of 2 teens, this title definitely caught my attention. We will start with each of the panelists introducing themselves. It has been such a pleasure to get to know each of them. And I recommend that you check out their bios on our website. But without further ado, we will start with Sahar, who will introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here today with all these lovely people. My name is Sahar Miranon Davis. I'm a college student studying cinema and broadcasting in hopes of becoming a possible director or screenwriter. I come from a mixed background. My father's African American and Cherokee, and on my mother's side, European and Quechua, which is an indigenous tribe from Bolivia. So I have a lot of first-hand experience on merging cultures and ways of being between families. Again, I'm so excited to be here, a little nervous, but we're all here to learn and explore this topic of parents always right. So I'll hand it to my panelist, Clarissa.
Thank you, Sahar. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, wherever you are. My name is Clarissa Cecile Agbortoko, and it is truly a joy to be here with you all today. I'm of Singaporean and Chinese descent, born and raised in Southern California. I went to university in Boston, and then after serving the Sichangu Oyate tribe in South Dakota, and then also the Crow tribe in Montana, I am now serving the Navajo Nation here in New Mexico. I'm really excited for our webinar today. We're going to dive deep, we're going to have a few laughs, and hopefully we'll leave you with a few thoughts to bring back to your family and friends.
Hey everyone, my name is Alan. So happy to be here with you. Um, my family is ethnically Teochew, though my parents were born and raised in Vietnam. And with it being the Lunar New Year, I just want to wish you all prosperity and health and happiness. Chúc mừng năm mới and xin niên khoai lạc. Um, I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I moved to New York after getting married about half a year ago. And so I'm currently training to become a marriage and family therapist. And so I'm really intrigued by this topic that we're going to be exploring today. So happy to be here with you all. Yogi?
Hi, everyone. Greetings from New Mexico here. My name is Shogi Agbotoko, and based on the last names, Clarissa is my wife. My cultural background is Cameroonian, West African, and we are currently medical professionals serving on the Native American reservation, the Navajo Nation. And so my upbringing and exposure to different parenting styles and a huge interest in community building and community strengthening has led me to participate in this webinar. So I hope to share and I hope to listen and I also hope to learn as we present on this topic. So as the topic highlights, parents think they're always right. That in itself is an underlying assumption, at times harbored by parents and also their kids. And so we were able to obtain some assumptions common to parents and children, and I would like to share this with you. Next slide. So some of the assumptions parents had of their children were, and I'll read off some of the assumptions on the slide. My kids should know what I know by now. Another assumption most parents had was my kid should just respect me and do what I say. It is wrong for a kid to question things the way they are. I gave them life and raised them, so they should respect and appreciate me and my rules. And some assumptions children had of their parents were they knew what was best for me, that their parents were always right, that my parents were perfect, and that nothing could hurt my parents. They were like gods. So some of the assumptions we were able to find. And so meanwhile, the effects of these assumptions are over time can be conflicting. And it is conflicting as we see a sense of failure creeping in from both parties. When a new learning is gained about the reality of either party, we see a certain sense of failure creeping in. For example, children, when they find out that their parents are not gods and they're not all perfect. And so, next slide, the goals for today's webinar are to, one, question the underlying material and spiritual assumptions of the parent-child dynamic, integrate our understanding of scientific and religious texts using our diverse cultural experiences. And we also hope to inspire you and everyone else listening or watching this with ideas to reflect on and to deepen their relationships with your families and your communities. Next slide. So as we dive into our session, I'd like to share a quote from the Universal House of Justice, which is the International Governing Council of the Baha'i Faith. And it reads, "At the heart of the learning process is inquiry into the nature of relationships that bind the individual, the community, and the institutions of society. Actors on the stage of history will have been locked in a struggle for power throughout time." So to share a little bit about my learnings from this quote and how it pertains to today's webinar, it highlights a central theme, the importance of exploring the nature of some of the core relationships that bind the individual, the community, and institutions. The Baha'i faith says that the family is the building block of civilization. And at the center of the family life of community life is the family. And at the center of family is these relationships, and specifically that of the parent and the child. And this quote also reminds me of another quote from Abdul Baha, and you can go on to the next slide. And Abdu'l-Baha is a son of Baha'u'llah, who is the manifestation of God and the founder of the Baha'i faith. And in this quote, he refers to the family as the foundation for world unity. And the quote reads, "Compare the nations of the world to the members of a family. A family is a nation in miniature. Simply enlarge the circle of the household, and you have the nation. Enlarge the circles of nations, and you have all humanity." So from the Baha'i writings, the purpose of Baha'u'llah's coming is to effect a fundamental transformation in the entire basics of society, which will involve the spiritualization of mankind and the achievement of unity in human relationships. And so when we bring it back to the original quote, it highlights, actors on the stage of history who have been locked in a struggle for power throughout time. And as in a nation, over the course of history, we find ourselves locked in this power struggle. And you also see that in the family as well, where parents and children are locked in this power dynamic, and most of the time expressing itself as two opposing forces. So in order for us to achieve Baha'u'llah's goal, in order for us to transform society, we have to bring transformed individuals into these bonds. And these transformed individuals interacting with your children to achieve the kingdom of God on earth, because the family is the building block of civilization. And so if we move on to the next slide, and so the latter part of that above quote, which is highlighted on here, it reads, "The conditions surrounding the family also surround the nation. The happenings in the family are the happenings in the life of the nation. Would it add to the progress and advancement of a family if dissensions should rise among its members, all fighting, pillaging each other, jealous and revengeful of injury, seeking selfish advantage? Nay, this would be the cause of the effacement of progress and advancement. So it is in the great family of nations, for nations are but an aggregate of families." So friends, that is why we're here today. And to get a better sense of the demographic of our attendees, we have a poll. I'll move on to the next slide. And this poll just seeks to capture, how many parents, children, or both we have on the call today. So I'll give it a couple seconds. Great. We can move on to the next slide. So our webinar today is structured into 4 sections. The first explores the theme of honor, which I'll be talking about as highlighted specifically in certain spiritual texts and within the context of parent and child. The second would be an exploration of cultural differences with a scientific look into how these differences affect certain outcomes. And the third will take a deeper dive into power dynamics between parent and child. And to bring it back home, with a more macro approach, the fourth section explores the nature of these relationships and how it affects the larger community. So for our first section, honor, I would like to share some quotes from the Bible, the Quran, and also the Baha'i writings. And to share a little bit about me, I grew up in a Baptist boarding school in West Africa. We had, morning devotionals and also evening devotionals every single day. And with a daily life of reading and reflecting on biblical texts, and one of the quotes that, parents didn't fail to bring up was a quote from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16. If we go on to the next slide. And so in this quote, it reads, "Honor your father and mother as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that your Lord your God is giving you." And there is another similar quote from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 to 3, that reads, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is thy first commandment, with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. So as you can see, and as you know, there are 10 commandments given to Moses, with only one of them holding an actual promise. And that promise is, living long and obey your parents, honor your father and mother was a command attached to that promise. So I always wondered and pondered on this commandment. And what does it mean to honor? How do we do that? Is it easier to honor parents when they do right by us? Now, how do we honor parents that may not have done right by us? And those are all questions I've always asked myself. But this quote to me in many ways is one-sided and top down, or rather down up, depending on how you look at it. But if we look at another quote from the Quran, it provides, some examples as to what honor looks like in a practical sense. And going from the biblical age, to the Quran, it says, do not scold them and address them with respectful words. So it kind of gives us a clue as to how we could go about this. And so the above quotes, takes me back to our original first quote at the start of my presentation about power dynamics and how we get locked in them over time. And we see that when the relationship between a child and a parent, if that stems from a power dynamic, this is unsustainable. And this unsustainable link diminishes over time as that power dynamic shifts. So we see children typically gaining more power by being independent, and parents losing that power by a lack of control. And so hence why I could see why the quote where the mentioned in the Bible and the Quran, had pointing out specific examples on how to honor our parents was much needed. But if you go on to the next slide, we see that Baha'u'llah's revelation is characterized by the eradication of old lifestyles and traditions and the collapse of time-honored institutions. We see in this quote from Abdul Baha that consultation between father and son, which could be extended to mother and daughter, father and daughter, and vice versa, will enable him to find the right solution. So I'll read this quote out. Regarding thy question about consultation of a father with his son, or a son with his father in matters of trade and commerce, consultation is one of the fundamental elements of the foundation of the law of God. Such consultation is assuredly acceptable, whether between father and son or with others. There is nothing better than this. Man must consult in all things, for this would lead him to the depths of each problem and enable him to find the right solution. So this consultative spirit between parent and child is one that has been challenged, based on generational and cultural differences. And we see that some cultures or generations or generational differences are yet to embrace, a consultative approach to family life. And in the quote from Abdul Baha, we see a promise as well, very similar to the promise seen in the 10 Commandments on the verse that I read earlier. And the promise Abdul Baha gives us is a promise of the results of a consultative spirit. And he states, for this will lead him to the depths of each problem and enable him to find the right solution. So when we think of the quote that I read earlier about the family being a nation in miniature, I imagine how a consultative spirit may be nurtured at the level of a family, and how that may transcend to that of a nation. And the promise of a consultative spirit applied to a nation, as Abdul Baha promises, will lead him to the depths of each problem. And imagine what that would look like. Imagine creating a nation where consultative spirit leads us to the depths of each problem and finding the right solution. So thank you, everyone, and I will call on Clarissa to share more about the role cultural differences play in this parent-child dynamic. So Clarissa, you have the floor.
Wow, how powerful. Thank you, Shogi, for highlighting the similarities and the messages between these religious teachings. That was really, really great. With that, let's dissect a part of our parent-child relationships that has a huge impact that many of us might identify with, which is the cultural lens through which we are raised. So can I have a show of virtual hands in the audience? How many of you were born and raised in a culture that was different from your neighborhood or your society? We'll give it a couple minutes. And if we could see the poll results as well, that would be wonderful. Okay, we kind of have an almost even split. So we've got around 47% and 53%. 47% said yes, and 53% said no. All right. And another deeper question, what kinds of underlying assumptions did you face growing up? And then what kinds of assumptions did you have about your friends' upbringings? This one might take a minute, because my understanding too, while we were doing this too, is it's sometimes easy to mix up assumptions and potential stereotypes, and sometimes they can cross over. So as we are continuing to receive your answers, I'll move on to our next slide, and then as we continue to have more answers come in, we can revisit this. So some of the underlying assumptions that we had come up with are on the slide. The first is that in the US, specifically with immigrant families, there is a higher emphasis on education over the emotional well-being of a child. Another one that we've heard is the idiom, spare the rod, spoil the child. If you haven't heard that one, definitely Google it. One that we hear a lot across many cultures too is that children have an easier upbringing than their parents. And what comes to mind for me is the tale of coming to the country with nothing but a nickel, or climbing the equivalent of Mount Everest to go to school every day. And lastly, we've also heard that some parents feel that their parents are a little bit warmer to their grandkids than to themselves when they were children. And some of these might be quite universal. In some cases, they might even be a reality, more than an assumption. So what is culture? The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. And what can it encompass? It can encompass some nationalities, ethnicities, it depends on the region as well. Even reflected within our panelists today, individuals can have intersecting cultural identities based on identification with more than one group. So there are 5 parenting features that supersede cultural differences listed here. Some audience members may be seeing the slide and thinking, where is our spiritual education? We can chat about that later, but let's briefly go over these 5. So physical caregiving describes a parent's responsibility to provide for children's bodily needs, health, safety, things like that. As children develop, they become more capable of taking care of their own physical needs. Studies have analyzed mother and infant relationships in multiple countries and found varying degrees of allotted encouragement to just sit independently, and how that kind of correlated with the age at which subsequent chore responsibilities were imparted on the children. Cognitive stimulation describes singing, talking, reading, playing, all activities that open the child to the world, which when we extend that into adolescence, can be seen through extracurriculars, involvement in a teen's school activities, and sending them to a summer camp or youth camps. The examples are endless, but you may see differences in engagement depending on whether there is a belief that education should be the responsibility of a school teacher or whether the primary teacher should be the parent or grandparent or another family member. Warmth is a really interesting one. How warmth is demonstrated can starkly contrast between cultures around the world. Take, for example, there have been multiple meta analyses on the topic that showed that Western parents demonstrated warmth by hugging, kissing, saying, I love you more frequently than Asian parents, who are more likely to demonstrate warmth by taking care of their children's educational needs. I'm remembering a post in Subtle Asian Traits, the Facebook group that went viral back in 2021, that equated a Cantonese parent's demonstration of love and caring to calling from downstairs "sik fan la," meaning time to eat, which turned out was more common amongst Asian households than previously realized. I will say too, as a personal recollection, that my parents have never said the words "I love you," but we learned to demonstrate this through actions, which has continued into adulthood for me. Control and monitoring can be sliced in many different ways: behavioral control, psychological control, how monitoring manifests in the parent's behaviors and the child's reactions too. Behavioral control involves rule setting, subsequent monitoring, while psychological control is often more associated with detrimental development parent-child relationship outcomes, but it involves limiting a child's thoughts and feelings or their expressions of those thoughts and feelings. There may be an association, as seen in some countries like Jordan or Kenya, that parents who use high levels of behavioral control also see high levels of warmth. But other countries, for example, the US or Sweden, see warmth not really being correlated with levels of control. Control also looks different as a child becomes more physically and emotionally capable. And especially in this age of cell phones and so many virtual platforms, monitoring becomes more difficult for parents, and what should be disclosed or how secretive a child should be is also somewhat affected by the culture set as well. But last but not least, discipline is heavily affected by country and subsequent cultures. Based on a study back in 2012, in Albania, 49% of patients reported they only used nonviolent forms of discipline, whereas no parents in Mongolia reported using exclusively nonviolent forms of discipline. And then in Vietnam, discipline was but a factor that was included in the socialization of children, and postural displays and mannerisms and verbal respect, etc. And so in the Baha'i faith, Abdul Baha states it is not permissible to strike a child or vilify him, for the child's character will be totally perverted if he be subjected to blows or verbal abuse. If the slightest undesirable trait should manifest itself, let her counsel the child and punish him and use means based on reason, even a slight verbal chastisement, should this be necessary, should be used. So let's see. Our next poll states, which of these aspects of parenting do you wish you had more of growing up? And once you guys are finished answering, if we can see potentially the responses from the underlying assumptions question growing up before we see the responses of this poll, that would be wonderful, but totally fine if we can. Alrighty, so it looks like we can move to, so the answers that you guys had typed in are not necessarily showing up for us right now. So we'll just move on to the answers that you guys had shared for this poll question, poll number 4. So around 67% of you had stated that you preferred to have more warmth growing up. 39% of the audience stated they wished they had more cognitive stimulation, and then 17% really emphasized some physical caregiving. It looks like nobody needed any more control and monitoring or discipline growing up, which is quite understandable. So let's take a quick example of cultural differences between child rearing focuses in two very similar countries, the US and Japan. And for those in the audience who study family dynamics, this is probably a common example. Both countries are similar as child-centered societies with high standards of living, but emphasize very different goals for child rearing, as shown in three separate studies done in 1989, 2007, and 2012. On the left, the culture in the US prioritizes a sense of meritocracy, which is continuously reflected as children grow older. There's an expectation of independence that permeates not only in the family and in the workplace, but also in the definition of success. Whereas in Japan, it's commonly pictured as more ethnically homogenous and an inward traditional society where people are largely devoted to collectivity and to the harmony of the group identity. And so patience, persistence, and accommodation are some virtues that are promoted amongst Japanese school children, whereas originality, exploration, and self-assertion are characteristics that are more encouraged among their American counterparts. Even this commonly referenced example could give you an idea then of the difference in parenting methods and therefore expectations of parents toward their children, resulting in a difference in attitude and approach back toward the parents by those same children. So what does that mean for a child as they emerge into adolescence and beyond? Well, in social studies that were observing the complex parent-teen relationships in Japan, mothers who had previously relied on the close emotional bond as a form of control may find their children becoming more psychologically independent. Whereas with American teens, there's kind of a goal of increased autonomy and emancipation from the parents in general, where the child and parents kind of settle their disagreements in a rational manner, where the input of each member is now equally valued, and where the autonomous identity of each member is kind of validated by the others. Alrighty. This next slide, I wanted to bring our attention to this particular quote, and I'll read it. Baha'u'llah appeared from the horizon of the Orient and reestablished the essential foundation of the religious teachings of the world. The worn-out traditional beliefs current among men were removed. And so I want to highlight this just because we, even on this webinar and, as participants and even future potential audience members, we kind of have an idea of our cultural identity and how it kind of affects us and how we are asked to act based on what the expectations have been set by either our culture from home or our culture as we grow into ourselves and as influenced by our society. I wanted to kind of pay attention to that last sentence. The worn out traditional beliefs current among men were removed. And so alluding to what Shovia touched on previously about consultation and how that is such a huge tool for us to get to the bottom of issues and situations, some of the tools that we are now provided thanks to Baha'u'llah's teachings and the teachings of the faith are slowly chipping away at some of the less harmonious, less united concepts of parent-child rearing, and really bringing in more of the, I guess, faith-based, but also truly, maybe the truly better better ways of rearing our children or even seeing our parents and honoring our parents. And I wanted to highlight too that this topic is a little bit divisive in the sense that, until you become a parent yourself, it may be difficult to understand where your parents are coming from. So this quote kind of brings back a central theme, a reminder in a way, and I'll read it. With so much emphasis on identification of differences among peoples, it is easy to forget that nearly all parents, regardless of culture, seek to lead happy, healthy, fulfilled parenthoods and to rear happy, healthy, fulfilled children. So it is important to be mindful that even as we are talking about the differences in cultures and how they can affect us growing up or affect our parenting of children, all of us, we would like to hope that all of us are really doing our best at the end of the day. And of course, we wanted to bring this back to the quote from the beginning of our presentation. At the heart of the learning process is an inquiry into the nature of the relationships that bind the individual, the community, and the institutions of society, actors on the stage of history who have been locked in a struggle for power throughout time. And gently speaking, the dynamic between parents and children throughout their lifetime is anything but stagnant, which Alan will be going over with us. But perhaps some insight on the cultural impact on parenting, we could see this struggle for power as a clash between maybe an individual's cultural expectation and the place that an individual has on in society's wider plans rather than a power struggle between parents and children. And with that, I will hand it over to Alan, who will be going over some power dynamics with us.
Thank you, Clarissa. So I just wanted to explore with everyone here power dynamics, particularly in the parent-child relationship. And I was just wondering, as I was thinking about this, are there common patterns of interactions that exist in families that between children and parents? Uh, so I decided to ask the help of Google. So using Google predictions as an experiment to see what questions children are having about their parents and what questions parents are having about their children. So let's check out the next slide. So when I typed in, why is my mom in the query, these are the predictions that came up that showed these are like the most commonly searched questions. I'll read them out. Why is my mom so annoying? Why is my mom so mean to me? Why is my mom always mad at me? Why is she so controlling? Why is she so strict? Why is she so stupid? Why is she jealous of me? Why is she always in a bad mood? And why is my mom so weird? In the next slide, or when we typed in, why is my dad? These are the results that came up. And so as you can see, many of these questions on this list is similar to the one on the mom's list. Aside from the last one, why is my dad gay? But in seeing just all these questions that came up, I know that I myself have asked these questions of my parents, and I'm just wondering, have you had any of these thoughts or questions about your parents? If you're tuning in, please feel free to let us know in the chat. And if you're courageous enough, go ahead and share what questions you've asked about your parents. Before we check out the list of questions parents are asking about their children, why is my child? Let's watch a short comic clip. Thank you. That was such a funny way that the comedian spoke about um, providing and growing his girls, where he actually felt like his girls were the ones in charge. And so, me myself, I only got married 6 months ago, and I don't have any children yet. But when I was a child, I never felt like I was in charge or had that even thought come up. And so it was actually the opposite. I always felt, my parents were in charge. Um, hence our title, that parents think that they're always right. And so I just wanted to check in with the parents tuning in here. Does what you say here resonate with you? Do you feel like it's your children who are in charge in some kind of way? Let us know in the chat. But for now, next slide. Here's what the parents are asking Google about their children. So when we put in why is my child, these are the questions that came up that people are searching for. Why is my child always sick? Why is my child shaking? Why are they so angry? Why are they throwing up? Why are they so defiant? Why is my child only coughing at night? Why is my child always hungry? Why is my child sleeping so much? Why is my child having panic attacks? And why is my child support late? It's always the last one that's really funny. um, but I think the sentiment here on this list actually matches up with um, the comedian's underlying points quite well, and that it's that perhaps like parents are stressed out about providing for their children. Um, Here, there's like love and concern from the parent's perspective. I love you. I want to take care of you. I want you to like me. Um, but it is my duty to provide and protect you. And perhaps I'm scared. I'm scared for your safety, and it's not easy, right? Then it's not easy being a parent. And not children naturally, they want to explore and experiment and try new things. They're naturally curious. They're learning and growing and developing. But then there's this like pain and sadness that comes in um, when they see their parents are, giving them rules and laws in order to uh, ensure their safety. They might be thinking, you don't care what I want. You're not interested in what I'm interested in. I'm so confused as to why are you so annoying, strict, controlling, as we read earlier. So this can breed this uncomfortable and negative cycle of interactions that uh, shape this dynamic. And now we have a power struggle. And yeah, the child's yearning for freedom, one could say, and the parent is trying to protect their child. So that's just one way of conceptualizing it. But how does the Baha'i writings make sense of all of this? Can it help us transcend these power struggles in parent-child dynamics? Here are a couple of quotes that I found helpful. Next slide. Uh, a world largely oblivious to the light of Baha'u'llah's revelation finds itself increasingly divided and disoriented on matters of truth, morality, identity, and purpose, and bewildered by the accelerating and corrosive effect of forces of disintegration. So earlier, when Shogi was reading that quote from Abdul Baha, that the world is made up of nations, and nations are made up of communities, and communities are made up of families, and families are made up of individuals, including parents and children. When a parent and child are struggling with each other, like, could it be that the source of all these different interactions and struggles with these different topics, that underneath all of that, could it be that they are essentially divided and disoriented on matters of truth, morality, identity, and purpose? And the next quote, the House of Justice hones in on the matter of identity, and it reads here, at the heart of the divisions in society today is a crisis of identity. The way people think about who they are, how they see their place in the world, determine how they relate to others and what they regard as their individual and collective purpose. So if we are unclear about who we are, unclear about our role, unclear about our purpose in this world, this crisis of identity shapes and contributes to the divisions and power struggles that we experience in our relationships with each other. So as I'm training to become a marriage and family therapist, I like to just share a few concepts and tools that I hope can help us reframe power dynamics. So yeah, they're all related to addressing this crisis of identity. Next. So this first concept comes from indigenous wisdom, and this is a medicine wheel, and it teaches us that each of us, our identity is made up of these four components, these four parts. It's the mind, the spirit, the body, and emotions. And so our indigenous elders and friends, they share that these four parts are gifts from our creator, and that each of us are responsible for maintaining a healthy balance between the four. That neglecting one part leads to an imbalance of the whole self. And so, in the context of a power dynamic or struggle, it can mean that it can mean that we are out of balance with these four parts of ourselves, whether we are the parent or the child in the situation. So I can recall that when things have gotten really tense at home between myself and my parents, um, it was my emotions that were like running high, and they were ultimately guiding my words and actions and even like my body. Um, and so it wasn't my whole balanced self that I was able to uh, wasn't able to show up in that way. So I think this is why children are asking Google why my parents are so mean to me. Why are they always angry? Why are they mad at me? And why are they in a bad mood? And for the parents, um, they were also asking about their children. Why is my child so angry, so defiant, having panic attacks? So perhaps um, we need help in when there's a power struggle or dynamic happening. We need help in um, regulating this emotional part of ourselves. So the next slide uh, are some points from uh, Dr. Mary Kurchenko, and she shares, while some parents may see power struggles as a time of disobedience, these moments are really opportunities for parents to teach a child about his or her emotions and become more connected with themselves and with each other. And it also says that emotions are the driving force behind these power struggles. So therefore, understanding emotions are key to diffusing power struggles. What does this look like? Parents can become their child's emotional coach. So they can do this by going below the surface of a power struggle and recognizing the emotions and needs that are coming up for themselves and that of their child. Being able to give language to these emotions and to these needs, um, processing it together. And they can also teach the child not only what is appropriate, but also alternative ways of expressing these emotions, such as anger, fear, pain, or even joy. So I think that this reframing of power struggles is helpful because when our emotions are activated and sparks are flying, we need to have the awareness to catch ourselves in those moments. Um, we need to catch ourselves when we're going into that cycle with the other person and pause and regulate our emotions. And especially for the parents to help our children regulate their emotions because they themselves have not learned how to do this yet. Um, and in fact, when I think about it, I think that like most children, they can only be as good at regulating their emotions as their parents are able to do that, since we all grow up mirroring and learning um, with our parents. So yeah, we can help each other regulate our emotions, find language for them, find the compassion to acknowledge and understand what's happening internally within ourselves and with each other, so that when power struggles are happening, we can de-escalate that tension and allow our minds, our body, and our spirits to also um, come and show up. So another helpful concept is having some sort of framework for developmental life stages. Um, and these help us understand where we and the other person are um, in their stage of life, in our stage of life, understanding our purpose at this point in time, and the themes and conflicts that we might be experiencing. So yeah, we do this so that we can have an accurate expectation for where we are developmentally, and we can also have more language then to address this crisis of identity that uh, might be contributing to these power struggles. So the example here is from the indigenous culture. As you can see, there's a medicine wheel in the middle there, and it is called the 7 stages of life, and it's focused on the spiritual journey of a person um, as that person navigates through the life cycle, growing and learning along the way, understanding more about themselves, and with it being so that they're able to connect to their life's purpose that Creator gave to us even before they were born. And so this is according to the indigenous wisdom, and I'm not going to go into details in explaining what these are specifically in each stage. Feel free to look it up. It's from Best Start Resource Center. But these stages give language to our role, the role and purpose of a person, which is helpful, especially when we want to reflect on what's going on. Why are they coming? Why are they presenting themselves in that way? It can show us um, what they're learning about who they are and where they are in their lives. Next slide. This shows us from a Western Eurocentric perspective, the stages of psychosocial development. And this is conceptualized by Dr. Eric Erickson. And for him, psychosocial means that this theory is based on observations about how social interactions and relationships play a role in the development and growth of a human being. And it suggests that people grow in a sequence that occurs over time and in the context of a larger community with other people. So at each of these stages here, preschool, school age, adolescence, underneath, there are these themes and conflicts that um, that person at that stage of life is learning about. And so, yeah, I'm also not going to go into detail here, but the point of sharing these developmental models is that they can help us have more compassionate curiosity about where we are and where the other person is, whether they're our children or our parents. We can have a more accurate expectation of one another based on their stage of development and their capabilities, and have some language to explore identities as we navigate through our life's challenges. So I encourage us to explore and identify these developmental frameworks. And as Clarissa has shared, this is an important point as well, that we come from so many different cultural realities and backgrounds, and there's all these different developmental models. So the beautiful thing is that we can learn from each other's cultures and developmental frameworks as well. I think that the more language we have, more different ways that we have to conceptualize our identities development, the more we can help each other navigate through these crises. So yeah, this slide consultation, gonna be my last one. I just want to end it on this quote. Consultation bestoweth greater awareness and transmuteth conjecture into certitude. It is a shining light which in a dark world leadeth the way and guideth. the maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. This is written by Baha'u'llah. And here he reminds us that we can learn and build understanding individually. While we can do that individually, the understanding that comes through our relationships in consultation with others is at a higher, also more deeper, more mature level. So I really do hope that we, you, me, our families are able to transform the feelings of division and disorientation that comes with power struggles into greater awareness and started to do consultation. And I hope that, the concepts of the medicine wheel, emotional regulation, and developmental life stages are some of the tools that can contribute to strengthening our family consultations. So on that note, Sahar, can you take us home?
Thank you, Alan. So that brings us to the nature of relationships. So we'll start with the next slide. We have a quote that we've seen throughout this presentation a little bit, but I'll go ahead and read it again. It says, "At the heart of the learning process is inquiry into the nature of relationships that bind the individual, the community, and the institutions of society, actors on the stage of history who have been locked in a struggle for power throughout time. In this context, the assumption that relations among them will inevitably conform to the dictates of competition, a notion that ignores the extraordinary potential of the human spirit, has been set aside in favor of more likely premise that their harmonious interactions can foster a civilization befitting mature humanity." So I want to pay a little closer attention to the part in bold. So it says, in this context, the assumption that relations among them will never conform to the dictates of competition. So I think we have this sort of cycle of competition in our relationships due to the environment of competition that we have in our society. So what I mean by that is when you say, for children, all their games revolve around competition. There's a winner and there's a loser. When you talk about schooling, who has the highest grades, who's going to go into the best college, in your job, who's going to be, the top boss, who's going to make the most money, have the best house. So we already have this sort of air that there's going to be a winner and a loser, and that then puts strain on our relationships, and presently the family relationship, because the family is the foundational relationship that we have with our parents, because they help teach and guide us through, and they're the first kind of teachers of us. And so I think with this one, the parents become sort of, the parents have power already because they're here to guide you and teach you, but because we have this sort of competition air to us, it puts more stress on that relationship. And therefore the one in power can be deemed as controlling or overbearing. And then the child can be seen as rebellious or trying to, push over that power. But it says that in doing that we ignore this extraordinary potential of the human spirit to have harmonious interactions and harmonious relationships amongst each other. And one way for me that I've kind of explored this way to have a more harmonious relationship and interaction is by exploring that human spirit. And by doing that, I teach something called a children's class, which is where you get children of the ages 5 to 8, and you teach them songs and prayer. You do art, you tell stories. And so I was teaching a children's class one time, and we had just gone over a virtue, because we also teach them virtues, and we had gone over being humble, how to be humble and have gratefulness, and being grateful for what you have. So when it was part of the art activity, I noticed that when they were drawing, the children would ask if they could borrow a pencil. They would say thank you and please, and they would compliment each other's artwork, like, "Oh, I love your drawing," or "I love the colors you use," or "That's so pretty." And what I was seeing was a harmonious relationship amongst the children. They were having, there was no competition amongst them. They didn't have to have the best drawing, and they were just having fun with it and complimenting each other. And I think that's due to the way that we had kind of explored their own human spirit. We talked about, how to be grateful and how to have gratitude and how to be humble. And I think this can happen with anybody. This can happen with adults, with parents, with grandparents. So anybody could have this sort of enlightening of like the human spirit. So on the next slide, we have another quote that relates to this one. So it says, a fundamental redefinition of human relationships is called for. Present day conception of what is natural and appropriate in relationships among human beings themselves, between human beings and nature, between the individual and society, and between the members of society and its institutions, reflect levels of understanding arrived at by the human race during earlier and less mature stages in its development. So what I love about this quote is it talks about how humans are still developing and have levels of understanding. And that's similar to that of the children's class. You know, as a child, you're still learning and you're developing and you're learning mannerisms and how to behave in, you know, society as a, you know, grateful person. And so at the current stage of the human race, we're at a point where we're still figuring out what it means to have a harmonious relationship. We're still exploring that. We're still figuring out how to become that. And not only with like, I love how it says, with ourselves, with nature, with society, with institutions. So it's different levels of how to interact with people. And so on the next slide, I have just a poll here that says, which of the following is affected by the way we connect to our parents? And then you have some options, your work, romantic, friendships, and casual. And when I say connect to our parents, I mean, when you think of a parental figure, a mother, a father, an aunt, an uncle, whoever that may be, what emotions rise up? What's your thought process? What is your feelings toward that person? And how do you think that affects the outer side of the ones listed, if you think that affects your work, romantic, friendship, or casual? So I'll wait a little bit for people to answer that. And if we could see the answers. Okay, well, while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yeah, so a lot of people said friendships, romantic, casual. And friendships is one a lot of people would assume, right? Because, you know, your parents help instill values and virtues in you. So that's the way normally people pick their friendships, based on how they view that person, what like views that person has. That also can go for romantic. So really all of these are affected by the way our parents, you know, raised us and how you connect with your parents. And that kind of goes into this next slide that I call the ripple effect. And so the ripple effect is, you have a base foundation of your parents and the way they raise you, and that kind of just ripples along to everything that you do and everyone you connect with. So similar to the previous quote, how it said the interactions between yourselves and nature and institutions, and how we did the poll with romantic and friendships and casual, all that is affected the way your parents have helped raise you. And so if you have a parental figure that when they have arguments, they are very contentious and there's a lot of negativity and a lot of anger, that might affect the way you handle arguments yourself. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have to go communicate with somebody, that might affect the way you communicate to that person. And it's similar to the children's class, because what we're doing is we're focusing on the human spirit and sort of bringing the light out of it and instilling these virtues. And so they can go home, and that might affect the way they talk to their friends at school. They might be like, well, now I know about gratefulness, and so I'm going to show my friends how to do it. That might affect the way they talk to their siblings or their parents. And so everything in a way has this rippling effect, whether it be something that can be viewed as negative or positive. So yeah, so thank you. I'm going to hand it to Teacher to close us out.
Thank you so much, Sahar. And thank you to each of the panelists. Really, really, really appreciate all the insights that you've shared. You provided us with, theological perspective, cultural perspectives, also had academic and spiritual perspectives on this topic of child and parent relationship, family relationships, and the relationship with society. So I think to bring this segment to a close before we enter into the Q&A discussion portion, I wanted to just share this last quote from the Universal House of Justice. Baha'u'llah came to bring unity to the world, and a fundamental unity that is of the family. Therefore, one must believe that the faith is intended to strengthen the family, not weaken it. And one of the keys to the strengthening of unity is loving consultation. The atmosphere within a Baha'i family, as within the community as a whole, should express the keynote of the cause of God, which the beloved guardian has stated, is not dictatorial, but humble fellowship, not arbitrary power, but the spirit of frank and loving consultation. So with that, I thank the presenters again, young adult, young professionals, amazing presentations, and opening it up to our viewers for Q&A. So one person says that in poll number 4, I didn't feel like I could have needed more of any of the items, but would have benefited from different forms of all. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Then another one, it is interesting to see the negative connotations on the Google searches for mom and dad. Yeah, I agree with that. Why do you think that is? Are we lacking gratefulness as a generation? Any panelist is welcome to address that question. Are we lacking gratefulness as a generation?
I think when we even ask like why is someone doing something very I don't know. Usually it's like a negative because they're confused, like there's a negative connotation to it, I feel. But this point about like gratefulness, um, like how do we get to gratefulness? Uh, it's hard to get to gratefulness when like I'm struggling with another person, when I'm in that moment of struggle with that person and all these emotions going on. It's hard to bring my spirit into that place. And so that's why we're just sharing, like regulating that part of ourselves so that the other part, the spirit can come in, is helpful. But I just want to see if anyone else had other thoughts.
I was going to mention that that in itself is an underlying assumption, and I was trying to speak to that underlying assumption as to if it's a gratitude challenge or not. And I think for me, it takes me back to the quote in the Baha'i perspective on consultation and how that, leads or gets to the depths of every concern and every answer. And then so for me, when I think about these questions that showed up on Google, I think what comes to mind is what if the parent and the child explored these items and created that consultative space within a home and within a family to explore this? And I think the fact that we're getting these questions posed on Google kind of tells me that either the parents or the children are exploring another avenue to generate insight as to how to navigate these dynamics. And I think Abdul Baha and the Baha'i perspective really captures that and provides us an outlet as to how to resolve this. So Google doesn't have all the answers, but I think
Oh.
exploring and generating a consultative spirit would help mitigate some of those.
I think also too, the participant, Miss Krista Suggs, she states, since we are in a culture that focuses more on the negatives rather than the positives, the people most likely to answer a poll, such as that are people who are having difficulties and are unhappy with their lives. I think also too, how often do we say, why is my mom so amazing on Google? It's you kind of know why your parents are, as amazing as they might be, or kind of like the answer to why potentially they exhibit positive attitudes, and hey, maybe you don't. But I think I kind of agree with Alan too, in that it's sometimes it's the context that kind of matters too. It's in moments of difficulty that you turn to an external source and you're like, hey, everyone, does anyone else go through this? Why does my parent do this?
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much. There's more questions coming in. One person shares that they're happy that the native medicine wheel was shared and a part of the conversation. And a quote here is shared: grown men can learn, oh, sorry, very little, sorry. Grown men can learn from very little children, for the hearts of the little children are pure. Therefore, the Great Spirit may show them many things which the older people miss. From Black Elk. I thought it was really important to share that. The next question is, how can parents nurture in their children a love for service to humanity? Sometimes attempts to do this can backfire when the parents are overly active in service. But if they're not active, then they cannot teach by their example. Very, very profound question.
I think that's really interesting because when I reflect on my desire for service, it didn't come from like, I mean, my parents were there to help encourage the development of me becoming a good person, but initially a lot of my like desire for service came from anger. Like I'm angry, I'm angry at like why are you people treating me this way? Why are my parents treating me this way? Um, and why can't young people have a voice, you know? And so it's interesting. So I'm not here to encourage um,
No,
um
there's
continuing.
positive anger. There is.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
spiritual kind.
yeah. But I think there is like something to be said about being able to like being able to be curious about what's happening internally with each of us, like for a parent and a child to do that and to be curious about their concerns. Um, what do they feel is unjust in this world?
Thank
I
you.
was gonna add something to that. I just wanted to bring up on my perspective to bring up a quote as well um, from the Baha'i writings, and it talks about the role of parents, and um, I'm just gonna read it. So the parents must exert every effort to rear their offspring to be religious, for should the children not attain this greatest of adornments, they will not obey their parents, which is which in a certain sense means that they will not obey God. Indeed, such children will show no consideration to anyone and will do exactly as they please. And for me, that quote kind of speaks to the question as well, and pretty much touches on how and what the role is. And based on that particular question that came in, I think and the quote, what I get from it is pretty much the effort, exerting every effort, and not necessarily expecting the results. It tells us about the results if we exert every effort. And I know from a more personal standpoint, I know that I grew up being a Baha'i in a religious setting, but that doesn't necessarily mean I was perfect and the ideal, kid growing up. And these teachings only clicked maybe 20 years down the road. And so, in regards to the question of parents nurturing and how could they, I think exerting every effort is the guidance. And when it comes to the results and the timeline, I think we leave that up to up to God and the universe.
Thank you, Shoki. Anyone else on this one? I wanted to piggyback off of what you said, Shori, because as a parent, I talk a lot with other parents, always asking other parents their thoughts on certain things. And there's, of course, we should completely abandon dictatorial or, overpowering parenting. However, that can get kind of confusing for people where they abandon like any form of boundaries or like emphasis. So people will say, oh, for spiritual education, if my child says, I don't want to go to an activity, or I don't want to hear this or that or whatever, then it's like completely that child's decision. But if that same child comes to the parent and says, I don't want to learn to read anymore. I've decided I don't need math. I'm just not going to go to school anymore. The parent would not say, oh, honey, it's your choice. I understand you don't want to learn math. They would be perturbed. They'd say, no, like you need this for your entire life. So in like manner, if children, they do need, in my viewpoint, that loving guidance of what Shori read. Parents are responsible to lovingly engender that thirst for spirituality and not wash their hands off as soon as a child says, I don't want, to say, oh, okay, you said that you don't want that, so we're not gonna, we'll just move on. I think that's a travesty, actually. Okay, so we are heading towards an hour and a half, so we're going to take one more question, and I think this question is perfect to close us out. What are some ways parents and children can strengthen their ability to consult effectively and lovingly with each other?
I think by really understanding the basis of what consultation is, and it's not like a thing to put, like, no one is at a top rank of consultation, and it's a place where like you can share ideas. And my family practices consultation, and it's changed throughout the years. So at the beginning, it was just like my parents come and they're like, this is what's going to happen. Okay, let's move on. But now we learn to, like, once we put our ideas out, we detach from them, and then they don't become our ideas and they're just ideas. And so I'm always holding like love as the center, and you're doing this for love and for a reason. So I think always remembering that you're like detached from your ideas and you're putting them out with intent that this is going to help, and with the intent of love.
I love that, Sahar. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't necessarily grow up with consultation in my family, but I think to answer the question, to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying too, I think ultimately just continuously deepening on what consultation is, how it can, what forms it can take. And I'm sure your parents consulted on consultation in the family too. And so, being able to consistently kind of reflect on how a certain consultation went, and ultimately it's really setting that tone for the conversation. If you guys have just got into a bit of an argument and now you want to consult, that's not going to work. And so it's all sorts of items, I think, that can really come together and strengthen that. And I think, Sahar, like you're in terms of what you were sharing, it's a gradual process over time, right? And so the question being, how can we strengthen the ability to consult? Really, it's just practice, deepening, practicing more, making mistakes, practicing more. And I think ultimately, hopefully, we can all gain that skill.
Thank you, Clarissa. Anyone else on the panel? Any thoughts on this last question?
I think my mind went to the quotes we read about the power struggle And the only thing I was going to add to the amazing points that Sahar and Clarissa brought up was be mindful of the power dynamic between parents and children while consulting, and also being mindful of that power struggle. And I think that was the only thing I'll add would be my suggestion or something to consider when consulting.
Alan, any last thoughts from you at all? No pressure, but
I think just it takes so much courage to consult. You know, it's new, or like it's a new way of relating. And so be patient, have compassion for yourself and your loved ones. And yeah, just all we can do is just do our best. And you are doing your best.
And I have to say that honestly, I have witnessed this quote, from Abdul Baha, where he says, where families do have unity, consultation, so forth, like it manifests to the world. You see the impact that a family could have. And I've witnessed that over and over again, that when loving consultation is actually employed on a regular basis, what power and influence and attractive force that family has. So it's possible. We know that our families are the nucleus of society, and as we nurture and bring unity to that entity, we are in turn bringing greater unity to the world. Thank you again on behalf of the Wilmette Institute for this stellar panel, all our viewers, our tech support, and we look forward to seeing you March 30th for the next one. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.